The axe bit deep into the frozen spruce, a sharp, resounding crack that echoed across the snow-laden valley, startling a pair of snowshoe hares from their cover. Evelyn, her breath pluming white in the biting air, paused, listening to the silence that rushed back in, a silence she had cultivated for over a decade. The wood, stiff with the relentless Alaskan cold, splintered grudgingly, demanding every ounce of her wiry strength. Her cabin, a sturdy log structure she had built mostly by hand, stood as a lone sentinel against the vast, indifferent expanse of the northern reach, its single window glowing faintly with the promise of warmth from the embers within. She had chosen this life, this stark, almost brutal peace, after the chaos of the outside world had become too much to bear. A former wildlife biologist, her hands once adept at delicate measurements and intricate data analysis, now knew the rough grain of timber and the smooth heft of an axe. The academic halls of Cambridge, Massachusetts, with their hushed whispers of research grants and peer reviews, felt like a dream from another lifetime, a life shattered by a loss too profound to name, a void that only the immense, untamed wilderness could begin to fill. Here, the rhythm was ancient, unforgiving, and profoundly honest. Her days were dictated not by a clock, but by the rising and setting of a sun that barely cleared the horizon in winter, by the ebb and flow of the seasons, by the raw demands of survival. Her nights belonged to the howl of the wind tearing through the pines, a sound both mournful and exhilarating, and the distant, often chilling, cries of its wild inhabitants. She understood the dangers, the omnipresent threat of frostbite or a sudden encounter with a grizzly rousing early, but she respected the boundaries. She rarely interfered, believing that nature's laws, though harsh, were absolute, a perfect, self-regulating system that humans only disrupted. To intrude was to corrupt, a lesson she had learned with a bitter taste long ago. The winter had settled in with an unusual, almost malicious intensity. Colder than any Evelyn could recall from her many years in the wilderness, it stretched its icy fingers relentlessly, refusing to loosen its grip even as the calendar crept past the midpoint of January. The snow lay deeper than a man's waist in places, a soft, treacherous blanket that muffled sound and swallowed light. Game, always a challenge to find in the lean months, was now critically scarce. She had seen the telltale signs for weeks, the sparse tracks of deer, too widely spaced, suggesting hurried, desperate travel, the sudden absence of rabbits from their usual feeding grounds, the desperate, hollow-eyed stares of the occasional lynx that passed her cabin, its coat dull, its movement slow. Among the local wolf packs, the struggle was particularly pronounced. Evelyn, with her seasoned eye and a pair of old, reliable binoculars, had observed them from a distance, tracking their movements, learning their territories. One particular pack, she noted, seemed to be suffering the most. It was identifiable by a distinct, large gray she-wolf, a formidable creature whose left ear bore a small, clean tear, a scar from some long-forgotten skirmish. Her pack, usually numbering 6 or 7, had dwindled. Their howls, once strong and resonant, carrying across miles of frozen tundra, now sounded weaker, more ragged, like a desperate prayer whispered into the biting wind. The tracks they left in the fresh snow, once bold and purposeful, were fewer, more hesitant, crisscrossing familiar paths in what appeared to be increasingly fruitless searches. Their shadows, fleeting glimpses between the skeletal trees, were gaunt, elongated specters against the blinding white, their bellies sunken, their fur matted with ice and desperation. A profound sense of impending doom hung in the air, a silent, predatory dread that even the vastness of the wilderness could not fully absorb. Days bled into weeks, each one bringing more biting cold and less hope. Evelyn, always observing from the silent vigil of her cabin window or the distant cover of a spruce thicket, watched the gray she-wolf's desperate hunt, The wolf's gaunt frame, once a testament to raw power, now moved with a chilling determination that spoke of profound hunger and an even deeper, more primal drive. Her flanks were hollow, her movements economical, almost mechanical, as she scoured the frozen landscape for anything, a frozen bird, a stray vole, anything that might sustain her. Evelyn saw the mother return to her den, a shallow cave tucked into a rocky outcrop a few miles from the cabin, with meager offerings. A frozen grouse, a sliver of dried caribou hide, sustenance barely enough for one, let alone a litter. From her remote vantage point, Evelyn could hear the faint, fragile whimpers of the pups, a chorus of tiny, hungry cries carried on the frigid air. They were so small, so vulnerable, utterly dependent on a world that offered nothing but ice and starvation. One by one, as the relentless cold tightened its grip, the whimpers ceased. First, a sudden silence, then another, until the chorus dwindled to a single, intermittent plea. Evelyn felt a pang of sorrow, a deep, resonant ache in her chest that she usually suppressed with the practiced detachment of a biologist. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the wild's unforgiving nature, a brutal lesson she had witnessed countless times. Yet, this time, the sorrow was sharper, more personal. Still, she maintained her distance, her hands clenched, her jaw tight, believing it was the only way. To interfere would be to break the ancient, unwritten covenant, to invite a chaos she had sworn to avoid, leaving her with a profound, gnawing sense of helplessness that settled deep in her bones. The profound, gnawing sense of helplessness settled deep in Evelyn's bones, a familiar chill that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. She knew the cycle, had studied it, understood its brutal necessity. Yet the memory of those fading whimpers, the image of the gaunt she-wolf, haunted her nights. She found herself scanning the tree line more often, not just for game, but for a glimpse of that distinctive gray coat. It was an intrusion on her carefully constructed detachment, a crack in the stoic wall she had built around her heart. Then, the she-wolf began to appear closer, not in a predatory way, not with the aggressive posture of a territorial animal, but as a silent, gaunt specter at the very edge of the tree line, sometimes visible from Evelyn's kitchen window. Her presence was unnerving, a violation of the unspoken rule of the wild: keep your distance. The wolf would stand motionless for long stretches, a statue carved from shadows and snow, her amber eyes, now even more sunken in her emaciated face, fixed on the cabin. There was no growl, no bared teeth, just an unnerving watchfulness that spoke of something beyond mere curiosity. Evelyn, a woman who had faced charging bears and territorial moose with a steady hand, felt a prickle of unease that was entirely new. It wasn't fear of attack, but a deeper, more unsettling sensation. The feeling of being seen, truly seen, by a creature that should remain a mystery. One morning, Evelyn discovered a half-frozen rabbit near her woodpile, placed with an almost deliberate care. It was small, barely more than bones and fur, clearly a struggle for the wolf to have caught and carried. The offering was stark, an unspoken, desperate gesture that went against every wild instinct Evelyn had ever studied. Wolves did not share their meager kills, especially not when starving. They certainly did not leave them for humans. It was a gesture of profound, unsettling significance, a wordless plea that spoke volumes of the she-wolf's plight, a silent testament to a desperation that transcended the natural order. Evelyn stared at the frozen carcass, a knot tightening in her stomach. The wolf had left it, then melted back into the shadows, leaving Evelyn to grapple with the implications of such an impossible gift. She didn't touch the rabbit, couldn't bring herself to. It sat there, a chilling monument to a mother's last desperate hope, until the scavengers eventually claimed it. The unspoken message, however, remained, burning itself into Evelyn's consciousness. The next few days were a blur of restless nights and anxious days. Evelyn's routine, once a comforting ritual, now felt punctuated by the phantom presence of those amber eyes. She found herself leaving out small scraps of dried meat, carefully placed far from the cabin, almost subconsciously, a silent acknowledgement of the she-wolf's plea, though she told herself it was merely a biological experiment, an observation of interspecies interaction. She rationalized it, but deep down, she knew it was more. It was a tentative step across a boundary she had sworn never to cross. Then came the morning that would forever alter the trajectory of her solitary life. The air was still, a heavy, frigid blanket that seemed to absorb all sound. The snow, untouched by wind, lay crisp and sparkling under a pale, watery sun. Evelyn stepped out onto her porch, the familiar creak of the old wood sounding unnaturally loud in the profound quiet, to gather firewood. Her axe, propped against the cabin wall, glinted dully. As her gaze swept the familiar clearing, her breath caught in her throat. Standing just a few yards from her porch, poised on the edge of the clearing, the gray she-wolf waited. She was not a shadow today. She was real, tangible, her every bone seemingly etched beneath her matted fur. But it was not her emaciated form that riveted Evelyn's attention. In her jaws, held with an impossible, breathtaking gentleness, was the last shivering pup. A tiny bundle of gray fur, no bigger than Evelyn's hand, its small body trembling visibly in the bitter cold. Evelyn froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the axe, then stopping, caught between primal fear and a dawning, overwhelming surge of something far more complex. The wolf's eyes, usually sharp and wary, were fixed on Evelyn. There was no aggression, no threat, only a raw, agonizing plea that transcended species, language, and the vast chasm of instinct. Slowly, deliberately, the wolf took a step forward, then another. Each movement was a testament to her profound weakness, yet imbued with an incredible, desperate purpose. She approached the porch, her head held low, the pup a fragile offering. With a soft, almost imperceptible motion, she lowered her head and laid the whimpering pup at Evelyn's feet. The pup, a mere wisp of life, let out a tiny, reedy cry, its eyes still closed, its small body convulsing with shivers. It was barely alive, a fragile spark flickering on the brink of extinction. The she-wolf then retreated a few paces, not fleeing, but creating a respectful, agonizing distance. She sat down on her haunches, her gaze never leaving Evelyn, a silent sentinel, her body language screaming a desperate, ancient request. Her eyes, those intelligent amber depths, were filled with an intensity that pierced through Evelyn's carefully constructed defenses, shattering her resolve. It was a look of complete, utter surrender, a mother's last, impossible gamble. Evelyn's heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the profound silence. Every fiber of her being screamed caution, warned her of the wild, of the unpredictable nature of such a creature. But the sight of that tiny, shivering life and the profound, agonizing trust in the mother's eyes rendered her immobile, suspended between the world she knew and an impossible choice. Against all her instincts, against all her learned wisdom as a biologist who understood the sanctity of the wild and the dangers of human interference, Evelyn knelt. The movement was slow, deliberate, as if she were performing a sacred ritual. Her hands, calloused and strong from years of chopping wood and mending fences, trembled slightly as she reached out. She carefully scooped up the whimpering pup. Its fur was impossibly soft, its tiny body surprisingly warm against her palm, yet so fragile, so utterly dependent. It was a weightless bundle of life, clinging to existence by the thinnest of threads. The she-wolf didn't flee. She remained seated, a silent, watchful guardian, observing Evelyn's every move with an unwavering intensity. Her eyes, still fixed on Evelyn, seemed to hold a breath she dared not release. This wasn't a simple handoff. It was the beginning of an impossible, fragile truce, an unspoken pact forged in the crucible of desperation and burgeoning compassion. Evelyn felt the profound weight of the pup in her hands, a tangible link binding two worlds that were never meant to intersect, a responsibility she hadn't asked for, yet couldn't refuse. The sheer audacity of the wolf's trust, the profound vulnerability of the pup had shattered her resolve, broken through the icy shell of her self-imposed isolation. She carried the pup inside, the she-wolf watching until the cabin door closed, then turning, a lone gray shadow melting back into the vast, indifferent wilderness, leaving Evelyn with a life-altering burden. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the wood stove was a stark contrast to the frigid world outside. Evelyn gently placed the pup on a thick wool blanket near the hearth. Its small body shivered uncontrollably, its tiny whimpers barely audible. She rummaged through her supplies, her mind racing, recalling fragments of her old studies on canine physiology, desperately trying to remember the specifics of newborn wolf care. Milk, it needed milk. She had powdered milk, usually reserved for her own coffee. She mixed a small amount with warm water, testing the temperature carefully on her wrist. Finding a clean eyedropper, she gently offered a few drops to the pup. It was a slow, painstaking process. The pup, barely conscious, instinctively latched onto the dropper, its tiny mouth working weakly. A fragile victory. She named him Rune, a name that spoke of mystery and ancient power, of symbols carved into stone, a testament to his wild origins. Raising Rune was a constant battle, a relentless test of Evelyn's patience and her understanding of the wild. The pup's wild instincts, though dormant at first, began to surface as he gained strength. He gnawed on everything, from the legs of her sturdy wooden table to the worn leather of her boots. His playful nips, though harmless at first, grew sharper, more insistent. The confines of the cabin, with its human sense and strange objects, clashed daily with the innate wildness that pulsed beneath Rune's soft gray fur. He would eye the door with a longing that Evelyn understood, a yearning for the vast, open spaces that were his birthright. Yet he also showed a surprising capacity for affection, nuzzling into her hand, whining softly when she left the room, following her like a shadow. He was a creature of paradox, a tiny enigma. Evelyn struggled with the feeding, the constant need for warmth, the delicate balance of nurturing without taming completely. She read old textbooks, consulted her faded field notes, trying to reconcile the scientific knowledge with the living, breathing reality of a wolf pup in her home. She fashioned a makeshift den from an old crate, lined with blankets, trying to replicate the security of a wolf den. The pup grew quickly, his legs lengthening, his movements becoming more coordinated, less clumsy. He learned to howl, a small, tentative sound at first, then a full-throated, primal cry that resonated through the cabin and out into the vast wilderness. A sound that sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine, a reminder of what he truly was. The she-wolf, meanwhile, remained a constant, spectral presence on the periphery. She rarely approached the cabin as closely as she had on that fateful morning, but Evelyn would catch glimpses of her, a fleeting shadow at the edge of the clearing, her amber eyes watching, always watching. Sometimes, Evelyn would find fresh kills, a ptarmigan, a snowshoe hare, left near the cabin's woodpile, a silent, continued provision from a mother who could not feed her pup herself, but whose instinct to provide remained undimmed. It was a profound, heartbreaking testament to the enduring bond between them, a mother's love transcending the boundaries of species, a fragile bridge built on trust and desperation. Evelyn would leave her own offerings in return, dried meat, a piece of venison she had carefully cured, placing it far enough away that the she-wolf would feel safe to retrieve it. It was a silent conversation, a continued acknowledgement of their impossible truce, a shared responsibility for the life they both cherished. As Rune grew from a clumsy pup into a sleek, inquisitive adolescent, news of Evelyn's unusual pet eventually reached the nearest small settlement, a cluster of hardy souls named Trapper's Creek, nestled some 50 miles downriver. It was a place of rough-hewn cabins and even rougher men and women, where gossip traveled slowly but with the force of a blizzard once it took hold. The news brought a mix of awe and suspicion. Most were simply bewildered, unable to comprehend why anyone, especially a solitary woman, would willingly bring a wild wolf into their home. A few trappers and hunters, men hardened by years of living on the edge of civilization, passing through Trappers Creek on their way to distant trap lines, warned her of the dangers. "A wolf is a wolf, Evelyn," old Silas Vance had grumbled, his face a roadmap of wrinkles carved by wind and sun. "You can feed it, you can house it, but you can't tame the wild out of it. It'll turn on you, mark my words." His words, though delivered with a gruff concern, echoed a deep-seated fear and misunderstanding of wolves, born of generations of conflict between man and predator. Others spoke of the folly of taming the wild, of interfering with nature's design, their voices tinged with a superstitious reverence for the untamed. Evelyn listened, her expression unreadable, but their words, though unwelcome, stoked the embers of her own internal doubts. Evelyn herself grappled with these questions, these whispers of unease that echoed in the quiet of her cabin. Was she truly saving Rune, or merely delaying its inevitable return to a world it was ill-equipped to face? Was she condemning it to a life of perpetual limbo, neither fully wild nor truly domesticated? She watched Rune's playful skirmishes with her old tattered rug, his instinctual pounces, his growing strength, and she saw the wildness, untamed and potent, simmering just beneath the surface. She knew, intellectually, that a wolf was not a dog. Its needs were different, its destiny carved by ancient forces she could not control. The thought of releasing him, of sending him back into the unforgiving wilderness he had barely known, filled her with a profound ache, a fear for his survival. But the thought of keeping him, of forcing him into a life that went against his very nature, felt like a betrayal. She was caught in a moral dilemma, a tangled web of compassion and responsibility, with no easy answers in sight. As spring approached, bringing with it the slow thaw and the promise of renewed life, new dangers emerged, casting long shadows over Evelyn's fragile peace. The melting snow revealed more than just green shoots. It revealed new tracks, bolder and more aggressive. A particularly large, scarred male wolf, displaced from its own territory by a younger, stronger rival, began to frequent the area around Evelyn's cabin. He was a lone wolf, desperate and dangerous, his presence a clear threat to both Rune and Evelyn. He stalked the perimeter, his howls deeper, more guttural than the she-wolf's, a challenge thrown into the wind. Rune, now nearly full-grown, would bristle at the scent, a low growl rumbling in his chest, his hackles rising, a primal response to an invading predator. Evelyn knew the danger. A lone male wolf, particularly one driven by hunger and territorial instinct, was a formidable adversary, far more unpredictable than the she-wolf. Simultaneously, a more insidious threat began to materialize. Rumors, carried on the wind and whispered by the few trappers who still passed through, spoke of a group of poachers operating in the northern reach. These weren't the honest subsistence hunters. These were ruthless men, drawn by the promise of valuable pelts, particularly those of wolves, which fetched a high price on the black market. They were known for their brutal methods, their disregard for seasons or quotas, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The delicate balance Evelyn had created, the impossible truce between woman and wolf, was about to be shattered by forces far more dangerous than the natural cycle of life and death. The wilderness, once a source of solace, now felt like a cage, tightening around her and the wild heart she had sworn to protect. Rune, now a sleek, powerful adolescent wolf, was caught between these two worlds, his internal conflict growing with every passing day. He instinctively responded to Evelyn's calls, a deep-seated loyalty born of warmth, food, and companionship. He would lie by her feet near the stove, his head resting on her lap, his eyes soft and trusting. Yet the wild howls of his mother, now stronger and more frequent as the pack slowly recovered from the harsh winter, and the intoxicating sense of the awakening forest beckoned powerfully. He would stand by the cabin door, his nose twitching, his body vibrating with an unspoken yearning. He was a creature of two loyalties, two homes, and the strain of this duality was becoming increasingly evident. The aggressive male wolf's presence intensified this internal struggle. One frigid afternoon, while Evelyn and Rune were collecting firewood a short distance from the cabin, the rogue wolf suddenly emerged from the dense spruce, a gray blur of muscle and menace. He lunged, not at Evelyn, but at Rune, asserting his dominance, his fangs bared in a snarl of territorial fury. Rune, still young but powerful, instinctively responded, a low growl erupting from his chest. He met the attack, a blur of snapping jaws and flashing claws, defending Evelyn, placing himself between her and the threat. It was a moment of pure, unthinking loyalty, a testament to the bond they shared. But then, in the midst of the skirmish, as the aggressive male retreated momentarily, Rune hesitated. His head snapped towards the tree line, where his mother, drawn by the commotion, stood watching, a silent, powerful presence. For a fleeting second, Rune looked from Evelyn to his mother, his amber eyes wide with confusion, with the agonizing weight of choice. The aggressive wolf, seeing the hesitation, renewed his attack. Evelyn, wielding a heavy log, roared, driving the rogue back, but the moment of Rune's indecision had been stark, a clear indication that the choice was upon him. He had to embrace his true nature, or forever be trapped in an unnatural limbo, a creature of neither world, destined to be torn apart by the conflicting demands of his existence. Evelyn saw it in his eyes, felt it in the tension of his powerful body. The time for a decision, for both of them, was drawing near. The confrontation with the poachers was brutal and swift, a terrifying culmination of the escalating threats. Evelyn had been aware of their presence for days, the telltale signs of illegal snares and fresh traps in the deeper woods. She had tried to scare them off, leaving false trails, even firing warning shots into the air. But these men were persistent, ruthless. One late afternoon, as Evelyn was returning to her cabin, a sudden snarl from Rune, who had been ranging ahead, alerted her. 3 men, their faces grim and determined, emerged from the tree line, their rifles glinting ominously in the fading light. They had spotted Rune, mistaking him for a wild wolf, a prize catch. "Hold it right there, lady," one of them yelled, his voice rough, his rifle aimed. "That's a wolf, and it's coming with us." Evelyn, her heart pounding, stepped forward, placing herself between Rune and the men. "He's not wild," she lied, her voice shaking but firm. "He's my companion." The men scoffed, advancing. "Looks pretty wild to me, and worth a pretty penny." Just as one of them raised his rifle, a low, guttural growl ripped through the air, not from Rune, but from the dense thicket behind them. The gray she-wolf, Rune's mother, burst forth, a furious blur of muscle and teeth. She launched herself at the nearest poacher, a primal force of nature, fiercely defending her territory, her son, and, in an astonishing act of loyalty, Evelyn. Rune, no longer conflicted, joined the fray, a powerful, snarling extension of his mother's fury. The poachers, caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack, were driven back, their shouts of anger turning to cries of alarm. The she-wolf, with Rune at her side, fought with a desperate, unyielding courage, a testament to the power of a mother's protection. They were driven off, retreating into the woods, but not without consequence. In the chaos, the she-wolf sustained injuries, a deep gash along her flank from a glancing blow, and a limp that spoke of a twisted leg. Evelyn, her own body shaking with adrenaline, knelt beside the injured wolf, her hand hovering, wanting to help, yet knowing her limits. The she-wolf whined softly, her eyes meeting Evelyn's, a look of profound gratitude mixed with pain. Rune, his fur bristling, stood protectively over his mother, then nudged her gently, urging her deeper into the woods, away from the lingering scent of human aggression. With a heavy heart, Evelyn understood. This was the moment. She opened the cabin door wide, A silent invitation, a release. "Go, Rune," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Go with your mother. Be wild." After a long, poignant look, a gaze that seemed to hold all the shared history, all the impossible bonds, Rune turned. He nudged Evelyn's hand one last time, a soft, almost imperceptible brush of his muzzle against her palm, then joined his mother, disappearing into the twilight, two gray shadows melting back into the vast, untamed world that was their true home. The she-wolf eventually recovered, her limp fading over the weeks, her howls, though less frequent, a comforting sound carried on the wind, a distant echo of a promise kept. Evelyn remained in her cabin, forever changed by the encounter. The silence that had once been her solace now felt different, imbued with the echoes of a wolf's howl, the memory of a tiny pup's whimpers, the ghost of a mother's desperate plea. Her solitude was no longer a shield against the world, but a space for reflection, for the profound lessons learned. She still saw Rune occasionally, a strong, magnificent wild wolf, sometimes with his own mate, his coat sleek and powerful, always with a knowing glance in her direction, a brief, silent acknowledgement of their shared history before he melted back into the forest. He was a testament to survival, to the enduring spirit of the wild, and to the impossible bond they had forged. The experience had taught her about the true meaning of connection, the raw, untamed spirit of life that defied categorization, and the profound, often painful sacrifice required to truly love. It had also taught her that true salvation often comes with the courage to let go, to allow life to follow its own course, even when it broke your heart. She carried the echo of a wolf's desperate plea, a reminder that compassion could bridge the widest chasm, even between species, and that the wild heart, once touched, could never truly be untamed, only understood and respected. Her world, once stark and predictable, was now richer, deeper, infused with the silent promises whispered across the vast wilderness, a legacy of compassion etched into the very landscape of her soul.